My name is Dominic Ferrone, and I'll be talking today about implementing CI and CD in enterprise when you've got a lot of legacy. Little background on CenturyLink and myself. CenturyLink is a telecommunication company that was formed with the merger of three regional telcos. US West, Embark, and CenturyTel. So that combination means that we're in 32 states, usually known as flyover country. We have about 47,000 employees, and it being primarily good old style telco. That's a lot of linemen, that's a lot of copper in the ground, and everything that comes with that. I don't know what talks you've been to this morning, but it's good to hear other people commiserate on pain. Doesn't make the pain go away, but it's good. It doesn't hurt as much when you know everybody else is going through it, or a lot of other people are going through it. And myself, I'm a lead architect on one of our on our strategy and innovation team, building the deployment framework and handling pushing code, so pushing new functionality, pushing new products out into the network. First I'll describe our original state. So what was there when I got there 3 years ago, got to CenturyLink 3 years ago. My team has a collection of applications that were built and deployed using Ant, and it basically created the whole platform. So it was about 10 years old. They started working on it 2005, 2006. And originally that was great. There were 13 components that got pushed out. It handled creating the runtime platform, embedding those applications in those different styles of runtime platforms, middleware, standalone Java, some databases, that kind of thing. But it was create a new ocean and push it out, not so much drain the ocean and refill it, but build a new ocean, stick it out there right next to the old one. Over time, the number of components and number of moving parts has increased. It's now up over 100, and to have our build framework and deployment framework scale along with the increase in components and increase in features, over time when things grow organically, you're just adding layers to an onion, and you're not really, problems don't go away, they just get buried. And so one of the tasks that I've been working on is how do we solve that problem? How do we migrate from what was really ahead of the time and gave us internally something that worked great? Over time, we deviated from where the rest of the industry went. So we got into a situation where we couldn't use some of those off-the-shelf solutions and some of those neat technologies that other people were using to solve the problems that we were having. And so we kind of, we're still marching down our own path. The rest of the industry went another way. And, people go to conferences, people hear about cool new things, and they want to use them, they want to gain those capabilities, but we had kind of already put ourselves on a different path. And, once you get that momentum, you can change velocity, but you still got the momentum. So the original was the process for, we have this update, we want to push it, we've got new code checked in, we want to push it. It was, there were many breakpoints where one team would check in the code, then they would request the build, they would request the testing team to start hitting it after the build happened. So there was a lot of manual handoff, a lot of manual, I'm just going to leave this here until they have time to come pick it up, that kind of thing, which, that was pretty normal once upon a time, but if you're going to increase the number of components and number of environments you're managing, you can't do that without hiring people, right? You need bodies, you need time. And to get around that, we had to kind of decompose what we had and start building the new. So one of our other than the manual steps and those handoffs, which all inject wait times, right? So the amount of time it takes from when somebody puts it there and says, okay, my work on this is done, as long as it takes them to come back or you to come back and say, hey, there was a problem with that, that's time that they are off working on something else, forgetting about what they did last week or last month even, in worst case, in bad cases. And due to the nature of our build environment, because it was creating the whole platform with each go in a very rigid, just ant and subtasks, ant tasks, subtasks. We had macros in it. It was great implementation of ant once upon a time, but over time, when you add a little thing here, a little thing there, if you want to change it, it suddenly becomes the ant monster that's very fragile, very brittle, and it haunts your every waking moment. And then what that would get into is poorly defined ownership. So was it a config change? Was it infrastructure change? Was it a network topology change? Is it just that the code doesn't work? Even though it compiled, it doesn't actually work once you push this whole environment out there. Some of our short pushes where we were pushing out new code, so just one of those components, we would push out the whole platform, and that could take 6 to 7 hours, as a go, if everything went okay. If there was an issue, you might not know it until hour 5, that 15 minutes in, things started going off the tracks, but you didn't know about it until you thought everything was there, everything's running, right? It's running, it compiled. So it then gets into, we didn't have any visibility of what part broke, right? So then it turned into the old-fashioned blame game, who owns what, that's not my area of responsibility. It worked in my environment, I don't know what's wrong here. One of our other good ideas that turned out to be a boat anchor that we were still dragging around was that the runtime properties and the application properties were all in the same files as our environment configurations. Because we were building everything at once, we'll just put it all in this one file and I only have to maintain one file. Well, if you propagate that file out to 400 different spots, that's not something you can quickly troubleshoot on go live night. So the last point was it was an all or nothing. It was definitely that, let's do the whole thing, everybody get ready because we're about to, redeploy the ocean. And when you're in a telco environment, you've got regulations, you've got, there's certain hours of the day where load is low and you might be able to route around what you're working on. But if somebody wants to call some of those quick numbers like 911 and 411, they better work. It's not hold down shift and hit reload and my page works next time. That doesn't work when people are trying to make phone calls. And because it is phone, it's really latency sensitive. Somebody dials a phone number and they don't hear a ring or a fast ring in 3 seconds, it's done. They don't do it again. So that's one of our part of the game, one of the rules to the game that we play in telco. So some of those challenges, once we identified what are the pain points, what do we need to fix, how do we get ourselves to where everyone else is so we can use some of these capabilities and really commiserate and borrow ideas from other domains, was, once you identify those, then it's what are these challenges, how do we quantify them, what do we need to do? The big one, when you're in a legacy environment, it's always there, is I want you to replace what we have and I want you to make it better, but I don't want to lose any capabilities or any features. I have this one thing that somebody uses every 11 months. but it better be there when you give me the new thing, right? Even if, you could quickly replace it with something else. Somebody's, what's the saying? The people are treating it like pets. It's their pets, it's their baby. They don't want to throw it out with the water. So that's just one of those things that you can kind of deal with in whichever way fits your environment. You can ask forgiveness later, or you can ask permission up front. Whatever your constraint is, you're going to have to work to it. The big one that everybody realized after about 11 years of this build framework was that we needed to decouple our code compilation, unit testing, making the component that does the work from the environment, right? If you know the environment's good, well, why are you touching it, right? If it's not broke, don't fix it. So especially in an environment where people are very change and risk averse. I mean, they say they're risk averse, they don't like to break things. The easy answer is, well, let's not let anything change. So not really a good thing if you have competition. That's not going to work out for you. So because our code compilation, environment creation was all in one big bag, if we pulled out code compilation, well, how are we going to build our platform, right? How are we going to get our runtimes out there? How are we going to get all our NoSQL databases out there, our enterprise bus technology, what have you? You have to re-engineer that as well. And then the big one, anytime you're in a group of people and you are working with them, but you're not their management chain, you're not their, you can't do anything other than cajole and say, this hasn't worked. Every time you've tried it, let's try my way, let's try a new way. You've got you're not the boss of me. I don't have budget for that. That's your idea. You fix the problem. Right now, it works for me fine to just say, you are the one that messed up the deployment, right? And is that really productive? Are you gaining anything from that? And a lot is, there's other ways to handle those problems other than, just the blame game. It's just not going to work. So I want to step back on the replacing the runtime environment creation. So previously we had all of our environments and all of our configurations all in one spot. So the analysis and going through what does it take to modify what we have to what is modern, we ran into some challenges. A lot of them were, if someone's worked in an environment for a decade, their solutions or the way out of the constraints that they've had in the past, a lot of times are going to be dictated by their perspective and not really like, what about this other tool? Or this is how other people do it. The solution already exists. How do we plug into that? And it can be you have to do a proof of concept. You have to show it to people. You have to say, this is the way it can work. I've already got one for you. Try this one. Start earning that trust. Get them to come back to the table and say, I want more of that. Because that, then you're not having to win an argument. You're showing them something that is, you're throwing them the life preserver. And they're going to grab it, right? They need a life preserver. So getting the resilience into our runtime environment so that they weren't constantly redeploying the whole thing, even when it wasn't broken. If your environment is maintained, some of the legacy environments, you have a different team that is doing your production hosting, your production runtime, maintenance there, your ops team. And it really does, things can change while you're not looking. So you have to have a way to validate your environment. You have to say, I'm just going to push the applications. I'm not going to, totally replace all of my library directories because I don't know if somebody dropped something else extra in there. Sometimes you can have issues around change management where the people who are hosting your app says we need change management for you guys, but they don't really apply the change management to their own actions. So, once upon a time, the solution was, well, I'll push the known good copy every time. And, nowadays you can just say, we've got this template, check it, do config management where if anything changes, you either get alerted, or if something changes, it gets rolled back, next time the sweep happens. Again, as we made this migration to, modern off-the-shelf tools, 21st century, hello. A lot of those issues, they were met with a little, people want the effect, but they don't want to do the work, kind of thing. It's like when my kid tells me that he's got a cold and he's got a sore throat, but he doesn't want to take the cough medicine. It's that situation. So, everybody grows up, but some of our behaviors persist, shall we say. So some of the solutions that we found, some of the ways we attacked those challenges was decomposing the rigid relationship. So any interaction point, any touch point where, once upon a time, for one reason or another, we bolted the things together so they couldn't come apart. We have to decompose those relationships, get them apart so that when one thing changed, the other thing had to go with it, right? So the fact that this directory got changed, we were doing it basically with a high-level symlink that basically everything below it was the new version of the ocean, right? So our whole application tier, all of our runtimes, were all under a different directory path. And when we changed that, not being able to plug in just a standard config management tool and scan it, it created some problems. It was that whole, hey, we got everything to turn on, but a third of it won't deploy, because somebody skipped patching or somebody skipped, some dependency on a set of servers or subset of servers. So breaking that monolith into as small of pieces as we could manage, just so that we're not moving the whole thing. We're just moving the parts that change. The other one was config management. Everybody's got their own favorite. Your environment might dictate one or the other, just given how it works, or you might have skill sets internally already that let you use one better than the other. My approach is just be agnostic. If it works for somebody, because we have multiple teams, if it works for them, that's fine with me. I'll manage your environments using your tool, but if we run into problems, if we can show that tool is the problem and there's no solution to it, swap it. Find something that addresses that. You don't want to trade the devil you know for the devil you don't know, but you still want to, you want to get away from the pain. One of the big ones was identifying what are the constraints, like what is the real constraint. Legacy environments, pretty much everywhere, you will hear because that's the way we've always done it, and that's not, no, that's, it made me pull my hair out. So you have to identify what are the real constraints. You have to validate that those are really constraints. And if that's, up the alley of, I'll beg forgiveness later, but if you tell me this is a constraint and I can change it in every lab environment and you don't notice, it's not a constraint, right? It's just you're familiar with it, you've always used it, you've always done it that way, and, you can collect data, start just, nowadays with disks being cheap, you can just hoover up as much data as possible and show them this is what this is costing you. Like you might not have money to fix it, but do you know how much money it's really costing you to continue doing what you're doing? And the being on the technical side where you're looking at solving technical problems and not getting into the people problem part of the pie, that's a big one, right? You want to be able to go talk to those folks and say, hey, this isn't really a technical problem. We have other ways to solve this while we're changing these things. Let's attack the real constraint, not the perceived constraints. And the biggie, everybody here is, I think, a member of this fan base, is automation. All of those, just drop it and wait for somebody else to pick it up off a list. Get rid of the list, or have a machine watch the list, right? The analogy I often use is loading docks. I've got many development teams, all of them delivering different things to different loading docks. And my team has to go monitor those loading docks, and whatever that type of package or deliverable is, we have to grab it as soon as it's on that loading dock and get it to the next space, right? If that's a integration environment where external teams can see it, start hitting it, legacy, yeah, you're gonna have some environments where it's just you, and that, giant device that there's only two of only exists in the real production environment, and then there's the one that got upgraded into obsolescence. The one that used to be in production is now in your certification lab. You're gonna find out about stuff further down the line. But with that automation, we've been able to take what used to be hours to compile it and build the artifact, and then hours, sometimes days, to actually build the new environment with that on it. Now, as soon as they find a problem, the longest amount of time it's going to take us is 43 minutes to push the new, right? If the developer says, oh, that's an easy one, I know exactly why that's happening, give me 5 minutes, I'll check it in. As soon as I see source control get updated, boom, it goes. Now, there's different ways and different constraints on managing that, right? Is it a type of environment that does have change control? You're gonna have to, is the update approval based? Is there a change control board involved? A lot of times, our solution has been we have a series of labs that the developers are free range. They can do self-service in the earlier ones in an integration environment. But then some of the other ones where we know other teams are there, other teams are relying on stability. You start cranking up how often change can happen. It becomes very dynamic, and if somebody is running some type of test that has multiple events occurring, if you're updating that environment 11 minutes into their test, they're not really going to be that happy, especially when some of your legacy, when I started at CenturyLink, there were tests that after we loaded the new environment, people literally just started picking up a telephone and dialing different numbers to hit different features. Let me hit voicemail. Let me see if I can get this one to, send me a voicemail that goes to text. Let me see if this one connects to the real line. If you're in that kind of environment, if you disrupt their testing cycle, you're not really making friends with that. Minimizing the constraints is really giving my clients, so the developers and the business users, the product owners, minimizing, I don't want to go to them and say, hey, I built you this new thing. Here's all the things you have to change, to use the way I've done this. That's, there's going to be pushback. If I can say, hey, you know how you used to fill out this, 3-page form and you had to schedule it, do all this stuff? If I can show them that all you have to do is tell me the name of the component, the revision in source control, and the environment you need it in, and it's done, you'll get a text or a chat in a chat room in Slack or FlowDoc, something like that, a notification that it's there in less time than it used to take you to fill out all the forms, that's going to really speed up adoption. People are not going to say, I don't like it. It's just all this overhead. If there's less overhead, you win. I mean, the argument wins itself, right? So some of the things that I repeat, probably to the point where people hate me at work, is the good old carpentry: measure it twice, cut it once. A lot of our self-service stuff in our development environments. Fun. A lot of our development environments, it gives the developers the ability to find problems before everybody else gets involved, right? They can cycle through using a procedure to push their code into their dev environment, and I forgot this one thing. It tells them, in less than a minute sometimes maximum. It takes about 10 minutes for them to get feedback that this failed. Check it out. And that goes right into the transparency. Giving them the transparency of having automation and logging that automation really gives you the ability to, if you instrument it right, you can find out which is the part that's giving me the problem. Is it that, somebody updated a firewall, so of course this web service isn't going to be online because the port's now blocked. Somebody loaded the firewall rule on one of the pair in the firewall, and that's why it's only working half the time, or every third hit it's working. Well, we can see that, not to make the job sound too like I'm trying to put myself out of a job too fast, but it turns into more of a, let me troubleshoot network endpoints and the communication between them, because I can validate all of my parts that they're up, that they're running, that they're doing what they're expected to do. Another big one that I harp on a lot is the difference between complexity and complicated. We're in a telco environment. A lot of the environments I've worked in before, it was, there were several hundred servers to every piece of network gear. I think the number I see bandied about is like 200 servers for every piece of network gear. At a telco, that's pretty much upside down. So we have a lot of people who know network gear, but then when you start talking to them about, 3-tier applications and just, things from the SDLC world, they just glass over by the second sentence. They're not really paying attention. And you've got a massive switching network that by its nature, it's complex. There are a lot of parts. By its nature, it's complex. Now, will it being complicated, or will overcomplication come in? It will if you let it. A lot of the politics, a lot of the people working with people stuff, that's where a lot of the complications come from. But if you can get the complexity automated, then I can kind of punt the complications to the managerial staff. So one of the big enablers for how we've done this is our original, I would describe our original was batch processing, for building these environments and building our code. And we're moving to a world where it's not batch, because we do everything in parallel. So it's not this big serial, let's do this procedure, then serially do the next one, then do the next one, with no checking of what state am I in after that last change occurred. I'm not, it would be wonderful if we had error handling for every step of the way, but when things are leftover bash scripts that people have modified over time, you're not really talking error handling. The scripts run, you're in some state, unless it really blocks your next script running, you're not going to know until you get to the step in the process. You have a 12-page document that tells you how to update this environment. Until you get to that step that does fail hard, you don't know that that step or one of the preceding dependencies is the one that got you. So the environment now, and for the majority of our components, so our roughly 100 components, through our development and one step after development lab, the developers can go in and say, this one, this component, this version, this environment, and it just goes. They get a notification, everybody can see it. I don't have to be involved. If one developer, nukes another developer, the other developer can just look, right? It says right there, just go check the channel. There's the guy who did it. Let me go talk to him, call him, email him, walk down to their cube, that kind of thing. In the environments where we have more of a strict change control, or there's more exposure to, somebody's got a deadline and they don't want you to push code into their environment that's going to take them offline. We have approval-based pushes, or we have, time-based, a nightly that updates an environment. But we have preceding environments where we've already vetted the code, right? If we drop it into that next environment, and we find that there is a variance in that environment, so a device, or we've been using mock-ups, up to that environment, and we hit the real thing and we realize, oops, not there. The ability to roll back to that known working copy or that known configuration is something that ElectricFlow has really given us. Like, instead of having to do all the legwork ourselves, we've been able to just, port our stuff into there and just schedule it. Once we worked out the order of events and how to test the state of our change. So you make the change, you test that the change left you in a state that you were expecting. Then you go to the next step, right? Don't keep doing work and then find out later that, step 43 was the one that really got you and you're already on 82, right? And maybe some of those changes in between are one-way changes. And you're gonna have to, spend 45 minutes, an hour stacking up dominoes so you can do it again. Nobody wants to be in that situation at 3:45 in the morning. Not anymore. After our migration and the changes that we've been making, it's allowed us to use tools and modern methodologies to approach some of these challenges that, if we're looking for a problem, we don't have to go explain why we're still having that problem to anybody we talk to. Everybody's got friends in other fields or other companies that have some of these same challenges. And when you go in and you have to describe, here's all these situations I have to deal with, how do I address this issue? A lot of people who aren't in a legacy environment and don't have all of that history of why we do it the way we do it, or the environmental requirements, it's made my life easier. I'm pretty sure you start gaining that time and you start gaining the ability to look at the tool and say, the tool told me this, right? You configure it, you use it the right way, maybe you extend some things, dream up some interesting ways to use the tool maybe that aren't in the manual. But if it benefits you, like, boom, just use it, right? And it's enabled us to kind of cut back on that blame game. If an owner of a product or an owner of part of, the stack can identify, hey, the problem's in my area, you're not just searching for a needle in a giant haystack. At least just search this one part of the haystack, right? Getting that ownership established, it doesn't mean you're not going to, you're all on the same team, you're all at the same company, you're all working towards the same goals. But, if you have ownership, what is your responsibility. You can take what actions that you need to take to ensure that you're pushing quality, right? And then if somebody else is having a problem and you hear about it, you can help out, if you can do something to minimize that or take one of those variables off the table so they don't have to deal with it anymore, you're just going to earn trust, you're going to build that relationship, and next time they have a problem, they're going to come to you and say, hey, you got any solutions for this one too? But you can also, hopefully, they'll reciprocate. So next time you find yourself bashing your head on the door and they own the door, maybe they'll leave it unlocked for you or something. It all speeds up how fast you can find out when there's an error, and you can all take ownership and either avoid it or put in the checks and the balances to address it. Another big win is being able to update just the parts of the system that are involved in that feature or that functionality. So we're only updating the parts that have changed, right? If you only update that part, sure, there may be some secondary, some tertiary relationships that you're going to find out, once you really throw, a couple million production customers on it, but that's the world we live in, right? You can, there it is, back to this one. The shortening, enabling faster root cause analysis and shorter mean time to resolution for when there are those issues. It's not just we know we have a problem, let's start looking. You have a system that shines the spotlight on the place where you need to start looking. That's the analogy that has served me well, and it very much it just makes your life easier, and people don't get involved, and you're not on one of those con calls where you're the 30th person to join this call, and everybody's sitting on the call wondering who's the person that's sneaking around in the system right now about to update something behind our back and then act like the problem just magically resolved itself. So, personal rant there, sorry about that. So, some of the things that are the things that we, I wouldn't call them maxims, but they are definitely things that we, when we're showing off how we do things to other teams, because we have internally we have these demo days that occur once a month, and so as we show off these things to other teams, some of who are still doing waterfall, there's, if your company's been around for 100 years, there may be people still doing things like they did 20 years ago, and their pain points that's just their reality. They don't see that there's a different way of doing it. So when you can demo something to them and they see, how are you doing that? How is this occurring that you're getting feedback in minutes, and my team, we leave it there, this other team picks it up, then the testing team takes it after they do, and so it's 6 weeks before we find out that we're not really done, and who wants to go back and work on that, right? So the things that we do is really validating the outcome. So checking state after every time you make a change. So even if it's put this file someplace, check that the file went there. I mean, really things that would seem to be simple, but somebody cut a corner, somebody didn't have time, they just needed to get a solution out. They pushed it out there, and that was 8 years ago. And so they just have been doing it that same way since then. You push everything out there, you hack it until it works, and you back away slowly, right? That methodology is, it creates a lot of pain, a lot of blame, a lot of mistrust, because people are like, what are you throwing over the wall at me now? May sound familiar to some folks. So another one is don't just settle for it says it's running. One of the things I've discovered in some of these legacy environments is that they have a monitoring tool that they built back after somebody had an outage, and they said you can't ever let this happen again. So they built a monitoring tool that basically says it responds to HTTP listen, right? It doesn't drill in and say, is it functioning? It just says, I've got a JVM running and there's a WAR file in it. There's a bean in it. That kind of thing. Like that's not really validation. You need to know, hey, I can drill the whole way to the back and get the response I expect. Now, in a legacy environment, that's going to be a little hard to retrofit. So, it becomes one of those get creative, work around the problem. If it's a real constraint, if you can validate that that's the constraint, then just get your data, go show it to everybody you can. Anybody who has an ability to start twisting arms to get that change in there, that you need these things. Because none of this automation is going to benefit if you're automating stupid, right? If you're automating stupid, then you end up with just, you can automate shooting yourself in the foot, but do you want to? So you have to have that ability to check it. Check the state, is it the way I expected? If not, what are my actions? And once you start building that framework, then you can start, 80% of the time, here's how this thing breaks, right? Here's the failure that's always bitten us, 4 out of 5 times. Come up with a solution for that and just put it in there. Check the state. I don't really have a way to tell if that's the issue, but you know what? 4 out of 5 times taking these steps have addressed that issue and got me online. Just take them. Boom, boom, boom. And as you're taking those things off the table, then you're just thinning out, what is an unknown error, right? You want to address the known unknowns and minimize it so it's just the unknown unknowns that might come at you. Somebody with a backhoe took out a switch, took out a cable somewhere. That's your unknown, right? You're not going to be able to plan for that. You can come up with ways to identify that that's what occurred, but fix the problems that you recognize and fix the problems that occur and cause you pain so you don't have to deal with them again. Testing, yeah, that's in a legacy environment. If they didn't have testing the first time they pushed it out there, and it is people picking up that phone and just dialing numbers, it's tough. It's really tough to get that budget or get people to come back and look at it. A lot of the bimodal IT is kind of in my own personal view, it just seems that that's a way that people try to manage that issue is I'm going to just leave the old stinker there and port this to, I'm going to rewrite it as a cloud native app, get the minimal functionality out there and start migrating customers to it. And the customers that use that one feature that are locking them into the old way, once you get everybody else on the new one and you're only impacting like a small handful of customers, if you do take down the old production environment, that's just, gas for the engine to port them over to cloud native. Get them to the new way of doing things, get those features in there so that those customers can come over. That's the big one, and it's always that game of we already worked on that. I don't plan on ever working on that again. So if it breaks, I'm just going to blame the guy I blamed last time. Like that's the people problem, right? And the personal one is the keep learning. Every time you hear about something new or you hear about a solution to a problem, it might not sound, on the front of it, it might not sound like it has anything to do with your environment or your problems, but it doesn't hurt to learn a little bit about it and see if it fits, right? If just because I go to, like a Docker hackathon and all the 20-somethings there are telling me, what do you mean BSDJL? I don't even know what that is. It's like, that's okay. There's things about Docker that are really going to solve some of the problems we've had. And, if you want to put your JavaScript clients in Docker images and, you push a new client and Monday morning, you're going to have 1,400 people try and download that between when they start showing up at work at 8:45 and about 9:30, you can spin up Docker images way faster than you can scale web servers that are just monoliths. You have to deploy extra servers to handle load, or you have to deploy, you have to add bandwidth to whatever systems or load balancers are taking that traffic. So yeah, that's one of our the ways we've handled some of these legacy constraints and challenges at CenturyLink. Yeah. So some of our sorry, some of our next steps. So the things that this has enabled us to do is now we have product teams who, I've heard this in talks I've listened to today. We have product owners now, instead of just owning, I just have my little silo, I'm responsible for what's in it. I want to keep all the risk outside my silo. If I can disintermediate it by pushing it off to this other team, let's go. But getting everybody to own their product, own that feature or that functionality in production, has really gotten everyone on board with, hey, this isn't a risk for somebody else. I think the thing I saw was the offense versus defense. The ops team is the defense and the devs are offense. But it's not really that way because you're on the same team. That really vibrated. I really got the sense of, oh yeah, in our environment, in my environment now, it is that we're trying to get away from that blame. We don't want to have this confrontation. We want to have this, everybody's on the same team, everybody's going to participate, everybody's going to work together to get that product out there because we need to capture customers with it, right? You want to get a product out, you want to get customers on that product and prove that, hey, people want this product, let's start adding features to it, right? Get away from that old model of, we're going to build a new thing and then marketing is going to find us customers, right? Get it out there, get people onto it, get some buzz going, and then roll out your features. But for us, the automation and getting those touch points, getting them decomposed, getting them separated, and then automating the transactions between them so that we don't have the failure here start cascading and then suddenly you're in an avalanche. So I'm pretty much at the end. So I don't know if anybody has any questions. Cool. Right on. Well, thanks guys.